Now, presidential candidate Ross Perot. Yesterday, he was in New Haven, Connecticut, to speak at the Yale Political Union. This event runs an hour and 10 minutes.
And the coordinators are thanked. Now, for an introduction of the guest, the President of the Union, Ms. Perot.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Yale Political Union. Before I introduce today's guest, I would like to congratulate the members of the Conservative Party whose strength, dedication, and perseverance have paid off, as they are now an official body in this union. Today, I have been afforded the rare opportunity of introducing to you a gentleman of national and international renown. From Texarkana to the forefront of the business and political community, Mr. Ross Perot has risen to the pinnacle of American society. He is a respected businessman and entrepreneur who parlayed an initial $1,000 investment into a multi-million-dollar operation. He is a committed employer who in 1979 risked his own life to save the lives of 2 employees who had been taken hostage in Iran. He is an honored citizen activist, philanthropist, and author. In addition, he is a distinguished statesman who served as the chairman of the Texans Committee for the War on Drugs. In 1992, his dramatic entrance into the presidential campaign was a cause célèbre. Mr. Perot is an inspiration to the grassroots political organizations and a formidable nemesis to those of us who believe in a two-party system. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Mr. Ross Perot.
Thank you. Privilege to be with you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Good to see you. Thank you. Thank you. What a beautiful day. Thank you. Good to see you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. It's a privilege to be with you today. And I have to say this in my opening comments. I hope that every student here in this great university, when you get up every morning, you don't feel cocky, you don't feel special, you don't feel like you're hot stuff. That you get up every morning and feel like the luckiest person in the world to have an opportunity to be here. And as you walk down the streets, and in this town you don't have to go too far to see people at the other end of the spectrum, never look at them with disdain, and always look at them and say, there but by the grace of God go I. Can anybody here explain to me why they're there and you're here? Who knows? Can anybody explain to any of us why there are people starving on the streets of India, young people, brighter than anybody here at Yale? And I just pick India arbitrarily. You are very fortunate to be here. And I'm sure that you will take full advantage of this great institution and make a tremendous contribution to this country and to this world. And as we discuss the problems that face our country today, I'm going to cover the problems, and the fun part will be the question and answer, and we'll get right to it. Keep in mind, you've got the people who signed the Declaration of Independence buried near here, some of them. They paid a tremendous price for our freedom. The people who created this country paid a terrible price. The Pilgrims who came over, if you ever saw one of those sailing ships, you wouldn't cross a river in it, much less the Atlantic Ocean. They came to be free. Now, freedom is precious, freedom is fragile, but we take it for granted after 200 years. If I don't make any other point to this audience today, please remember that every time you pass a law, you give up part of your freedom. So make sure that that law you pass is worth giving up the freedom you give up. And learn from history. History can teach us so much. You want to pass a law as close to the problem as possible. If it's a local problem, pass a local law. If it's a county problem, pass a county law. A state problem, pass a state law. And if all else fails, pass a federal law. We got it backward now. We want to pass a federal law to tell you what kind of doorknobs to put on your house. There goes your freedom. I'm going to cover problems today that will seem great, but they're insignificant compared to heading west in a covered wagon, insignificant compared to having to hunt for food every night at the end of the day. And never forget, in those covered wagons, everybody didn't find food every night. And guess what? The people who found it shared it with those who didn't. Now that is the mark of a great country. Always help other people. And you will be in a unique position to do it because of the wonderful education you're getting here. As you think about the future of our great country, think of the words of the Scottish historian Alexander Tytler, who said, "A democracy can only exist until the voters discover that they can vote benefits for themselves from the public treasury." Now, having said that, think of the debates you've heard this in the last few weeks, the 3 debates. It was a non-stop list of free candy for you, right? Trivia time, right? Okay, now then, who is going to have to pay for that free candy? You are. There is no free candy. But it works because we're so easily manipulated. Then Professor Tytler said, from that moment on, the majority of the voters will always vote for the candidates promising the people benefits from the public treasury, with the end result being that democracies always collapse over loose fiscal policy. I'm going to give you all the federal numbers today. And as you watch them, I would like for you to think of yourself as a fighter pilot flying at twice the speed of sound, looking at the instrument panel. At some point, you would all eject. But you can't eject, because this is our country. There is no better place in the world to live. We have to solve these problems. Professor Tytler goes on to say that the average age of the world's democracies is 200 years. George Washington was sworn in 207 years ago. I'll leave you with that thought on Professor Tytler. The Democrats and Republicans, after 3 debates, never even mentioned the nation's most critical problem, our national debt. This issue will determine your futures and the future of our country. A nation cannot be a superpower unless it is an economic superpower. It is vitally important that we remain a superpower so that we can be a constructive force for good throughout the world. If you question that you must be an economic superpower, look at Russia. When Russia collapsed financially, Russia was out of the game. Why didn't they discuss the debt in the debates? Both parties created this debt. They can't discuss it. Why didn't they want me in the debates? They knew that I would bring this little skunk up by the tail. Now, as you all know, we're $5 trillion in debt, and we've accumulated most of that debt in the last 20 years. That's after 200 years, $5 trillion in debt, but most of it in the last 20 years. How big is $5 trillion? Most people can't grasp it. Here's the best thing I've come up with. We don't have $5 trillion of currency in print. So if we took all the money in existence, rounded it up tonight to pay the debt, we don't have $5 trillion in currency in print. And surely Forrest Gump can get it. That's too much debt. Can we agree on that? Okay. Next. Our government finances 70% of this debt short term in order to artificially reduce the deficit so they can lean into the crowd and say, I've cut your deficit, and so on and so on and so forth. This is like financing your house mortgage month to month. You wouldn't do that because you know that when interest rates go up, and we're holding interest rates down now because we have this huge national debt, but when they go up again, and I've seen short-term interest as high as 15%. Every time they go up 1%, since 70% of the $5 trillion is financed short-term, the deficit will go up $35 billion a year. Oops. Obviously, while interest rates were way down, we should have gone long-term, but we didn't. Now, all you heard is that they were going to balance the budget. All you heard is that this big tax increase in 1993 was going to take care of us forever. And here are the official government numbers. If they're going to balance the budget, why does the debt go up to $8 trillion by the year 2005? There's no plan to balance the budget, period. Here are the government numbers. In the year 2030, according to the President's Office of Management and Budget, the debt will be increasing at the rate of $4.1 trillion per year. Now let's crank ahead. You're out of college. You'll be probably, let's say that's 35 years, 34 years from now. You'll be in your 50s. You'll be approaching retirement. You'll have children. Some of you may have little grandchildren. And we are going to be increasing the debt at $4 trillion a year. And what will the impact be on you, your children, and grandchildren? For example, and where does all this come from? The cost of Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security in the year 2030 alone will be $3.9 trillion a year. That's more than twice what we spend to run our country today. The Social Security deficit in the year 2050, if we leave it as it is, and everybody says they're going to keep it the way it is, right? They promised you that, right? You can't. If you can add, you can see, you've got to transition to a pension fund. You can't stay with pay-as-you-go. The numbers tell the story. We'll talk about that in the Q&A. 40% of your paycheck in the year 2050 will be needed just for Social Security. Now, if you're still not convinced that we're not managing our country's financial affairs correctly, go to page 25 of President Clinton's 1995 budget, and you will read that a little baby born tonight, and most of your little babies will be born after tonight, but you will have them and you will cherish them. And they will be the best part of your life. And I can tell you this, my 5 children mean far more to me than any of the financial success I've ever had, and financial success. I don't know what, financial success I have ever had, and they are all too good to be true, and I have 10 perfect grandchildren, and they are just a joy. So you won't realize that. My children have all come to me and said, once they had children, said, we never knew how much you loved us until we had our children. That's in front of you. Well, our president forecasts that those children born after tonight will pay an 82% tax rate. That is the end of the American dream. Imagine at the end of your careers keeping 18 cents out of every dollar you earn and having your children and grandchildren looking forward to that. For those of you who've studied accounting, you know the accounting formula, assets minus liabilities equal net worth. Go to page 18 of the 1997 budget and you will see that our government calculates that the greatest country in the history of man has a $2.98 trillion negative net worth today. That's the largest bankruptcy in history if it was a company. But they left out $17 trillion of unfunded federal guarantees. So the negative net worth is really $20 trillion. Any publicly owned company would have had to include those federally unfunded guarantees. You say, like what, Ross? Think of all the federal employees who are retiring. You say they must have a pension fund, right? Every corporation that has pension funds is required by federal law to keep those funds funded. But in the good old USA, we've got a $1.8 trillion unfunded federal liability. So as these people retire, you will have to pay for their retirement out of your paycheck because we didn't create a pension fund. Not the kind of thing you want to talk about in a debate. In 1960, to put everything in perspective, let me give you the history of the tax system very quickly. During the Revolution, we fought and won the Revolution. Each American paid 67.5 cents a year. Taxes. After the Revolution, we became a nation. Taxes went up $1 per year per person. 120 years later, in 1910, taxes had soared to $6.75 per person. You can live with that, right? Then we put in the income tax amendment, and by 1929, taxes had gone from $6.75 to $29 per year per person. Still sounds good. Today, taxes are $5,700 a year per person. We ran the country for $100 billion a year when John Kennedy was president. We're now spending 15 times that much, $1.5 trillion a year. Are you 15 times better off is the logical question. And in addition, we've accumulated a $5 trillion debt. Well, surely this kind of spending created utopia, and our only problem should be to pay back the debt, right? Here are the facts. The standard of living is down for 4 out of 5 working Americans. Manufacturing workers who were making $440 a week are now making $270 a week. The top growth jobs in the 1980s, you heard all this good news about all these new jobs. They didn't tell you what these jobs were. They didn't tell you if they were part-time or full-time. They didn't tell you if they were minimum wage. Here it is, and they obviously wouldn't want this discussed in the debate. The top jobs in the 1980s were janitor, cleaner, cashier, secretary, and food preparation worker. None paying enough to support a family. That's the kind of jobs that are being created here. 1992, people with PhDs in math and chemistry and physics from Caltech and MIT were having trouble finding work. Unthinkable in this great country. And today, American workers net 20% less in real wages than in 1973. In most cases where both the man and wife work in a two-parent family, the wife is working because she has to work to maintain a middle-class life for the children. And here are the facts. 2 paychecks in a family today is barely equal the purchasing power of 1 paycheck 25 years ago. In contrast, income is up 60% for the top 5% of our workforce, and income is up 137% for the top 1%. The rich get richer and the poor get poorer under our current system. Now let's assume that that's the way you think you like it. There's something you're missing. If you don't have a giant middle class in this country will no longer be the country it was, because the heart of the tax base is there. If you confiscated all of the wealth of the Forbes 400, I'm just saying take it all, put them on welfare. Okay? Okay, now then, you say, now what could we accomplish? You could balance the budget for 2 years. Have I made my case of the importance of the middle class? At one time, Henry Ford paid his automobile workers in the Depression more than he had to, and he was in trouble with the other automobile makers, and they called him in and chewed him out and said, "Henry, why do you do this?" And he smiled and said, "So they can afford to buy my cars." I hope I've made the point. People who don't make anything can't buy anything. The greatest thing that can happen to the people who have been blessed financially and have businesses and factories is for everybody in the middle class to be a good customer, right? It's pretty basic stuff, but we tend to lose sight of it. Big government and $5 trillion in debt did not benefit the people. Now we have another deficit, and that's the trade deficit, which most people don't understand. A trade surplus is good. That means that we're selling more goods around the world than we're buying from other countries. A trade deficit is bad because that means a huge outflow of dollars and jobs. Our U.S. merchandise trade deficit this year is $174 billion. That's the largest trade deficit of any nation in history. And our cumulative trade deficit is now over $1 trillion. In our country, we now have more people working in government than in manufacturing. That is certainly a bad sign. The #1 growth industry in the United States is the growth of the government. Isn't that interesting? Say, what's the product? It doesn't make a product. Well, does it make a profit? No, it loses money. That's not the kind of #1 growth industry you want. Roughly 25% of the cost of making a product Roughly 25% of the cost of making a product is the cost of labor. You can hire 47 Vietnamese workers for 1 American worker, 50 Chinese workers for 1 American, 37 Indonesian workers for 1 American, or 9 Mexicans for 1 American. No benefits, no Social Security, no Medicare, no nothing, no pollution controls, no environmental controls. Dump it in the rivers, pump it in the air. How are you going to compete with that in the good old USA and keep the manufacturing jobs here? You can't. China now manufactures 2/3 of the world's shoes. We may fight barefooted again at Valley Forge. Half the world's toys. Now this is honest work. I know a lot of you think, how do we revitalize our inner cities? You say, these are low-tech jobs. This is honest work, making clothes, making shoes, making toys, making bicycles. See, most of the world's bicycles and power tools now come from China. These are the jobs that could revitalize our inner cities. Not everybody gets to go to Yale. Now, to show you how I am for fair, free international trade, I'm not for stupid, one-sided trade deals. Now, let me give you an example. Our 1995 trade deficit with China, $38 billion. 1996 is expected to be $50 billion. We are the only industrialized nation in the world that does not have a trade surplus with China. We better hire somebody else to negotiate for us in the future, I think. Our 1995 merchandise trade deficit with Japan was $59 billion. NAFTA was sold to the American people as a real job creator and money maker. Our 1995 trade deficit with Canada was $18 billion. Our 1995 trade deficit with Mexico was $15 billion. Our cumulative NAFTA deficit so far is $70 billion, and it's about to go through the roof, because in the early years of NAFTA, it should have been positive as they bought equipment from us to build factories. A who's who of big corporations around the world are flooding Mexico to build factories there because the labor costs are non-existent, or 1/10 of ours roughly, and the cost of, don't have to pay the benefits and so on and so forth they have to pay here. I've left out Mexico's biggest export to the United States. It's illegal drugs, $120 billion a year coming across the border from Mexico into our great country. That's chemical warfare against our children. We should not tolerate it. I would not tolerate it, because it will destroy our society, it will destroy our people, it will destroy our inner cities. And if there's anybody in this great school who is even thinking of ever using drugs, with your wonderful minds, go, please, to a neonatal unit where little children are born. Ask to see the babies of parents who use drugs. For example, crack babies typically stay in a hospital 42 days. It costs the taxpayers $125,000 a birth. Typically, the mother disappears after 3 days, and the baby becomes a ward of the state, and that baby is permanently and genetically damaged and will never lead a normal life because somebody got high. Think ahead anytime you think about drugs, and don't touch them. If you never touch them, you don't have to withdraw. Now, to show you, the most important thing, the job of the President is that of Commander-in-Chief, and making sure that we protect and defend this great country. And to show you how squirrely our process is now, I want to quote to you from a recent Department of Defense procurement book. Now, we've shipped all the manufacturing capability overseas. We used to, 90% of everything we bought in the USA, we made here in the 1950s. It's down to 50% now. So, with all the factories overseas, here's the new Department of Defense procurement policy. Foreign dependence does not mean foreign vulnerability. I hope you'll have a debate on that someday. In other words, if you can't make guns and weapons and what have you here, you got to ship them across the world. That does not make you vulnerable. Now, keep in mind, ships, planes, and everything are tracked by satellite. You know where they are at all times. Nuclear subs roar around under the ocean at 30 and 40 knots. You have unmanned guided missiles. It's a question of when you sink the ship, not if and when. World War II, you had to get really close with radar. You had to get to the horizon to even find it. Now you know where they are all the time. Foreign sources cannot be automatically excluded on the basis to protect classified or unique technologies. Well, if you have a secret weapon, I don't think you want to send it overseas to be built, right? And teach the world how to build it. Well, okay. Because a foreign firm has control of technology, that does not make us vulnerable. I'd like to have a good debate on that. Sheer physical distance from the United States is not by itself a risk which merits foreign source exclusion. We are just giving away the store here. You've seen how all of these weapons get into the hands of irresponsible people now. That will pyramid if we let this sort of thing continue. That never came up in the presidential debates either. Well, as you think about it, remember, if you're going to be a superpower, you have to be an economic superpower, and you have to be a manufacturing superpower. Otherwise, you can't defend this great country. As I travel around, everywhere I go, people stop me and say, "Ross, do we have bad people in Washington?" And I say, "No, we have good people in Washington, but they're trapped inside a bad system." I want all of you, and particularly those of you who are in engineering, to listen carefully, and it will just be painfully obvious to you why the system doesn't work. Political campaigns go on too long and cost too much. It cost an average of $4 million for each Senate campaign. It cost $800,000 for the typical House campaign. And it cost about $100 million for a presidential campaign. Where does that money come from? Special interests who buy and control both political parties, provide the funds, and after the election, they get paid back big time with your tax money. I can give you specific examples of companies who give maybe $5 million a year and get a $500 million a year subsidy. That makes no sense. Well, who pays for that subsidy? You, the taxpayers, pay for that subsidy. We have to change the system. The large contributors control our government, not the owners of the country, the people. What is the solution? Shorten campaigns to 4 months. They do it all over the world. We campaign for presidents 2 years, Senate 1 year, House of Representatives every other year. Let's shorten campaigns to 4 months. That will dramatically reduce the cost of campaigns. Then pass laws requiring the people who are running for office to get all of the money, if they're a congressman, from their district, and if they're a senator, get all the money from your state. Now then, they've got to go back home. Right now, I can get into Congress from some remote rural district, get on the banking committee, get money from big banks all over the world. What does that have to do with my country or my committee or my people? Nothing. But if I got to go home to raise the money, I'm going to be really sensitive to the people who sent me to Washington, right? That's the way to get it done. We've got to get rid of PAC money, foreign money, and soft money. I'm sure you've been reading about all the foreign money. It's up to the point now where you almost, if you're too old to cry, you laugh. Can you imagine raising money in a Buddhist temple from nuns who are sworn to poverty and getting $5,000 apiece from them? Have you all read that story? Al Gore was out in California doing that, and then the Wall Street Journal went out and asked the nuns who were sworn to poverty where they got $5,000 apiece, and they said, well, this nice lady gave it to me and told me to give it to the vice president. This is illegal. Have you seen the Common Cause report? Have you seen the Common Cause report? Get that, read it carefully, where both parties are illegally spending millions of dollars of soft money. The candidates are. The money was given to the parties, but the candidates have gone in, they've taken control of it, they're spending it. Common Cause is a very responsible organization. They've documented it. They call it criminal. And yet we, the people, just sort of seem complacent and lie back and seem to have no concern at all about the ethical standards of the people we elect for office. And that's the reason only 19% of the people trust our government. Our highest priority in the Reform Party is to restore the trust and confidence of the people. In order to do that, you must set the highest ethical standards. You don't take gifts, you don't take payoffs. Do you think it makes sense for former presidents of the United States to go to Asia and get $2 million for 2 20-minute speeches? Does anybody here think that is in our interest? Here's why. It sends a terrible message to current and future presidents about where the pot of gold is at the end of the rainbow, right? Next, do you think it's proper for former presidents to take multi-million-dollar gifts from foreign nations for their libraries? No, it sends the same terrible message to current and future presidents. Do you think it's proper for chief trade negotiators, once they leave office, to become foreign lobbyists and collect $500,000 apiece a year? And there's an almost unbroken history of them doing that. And here is the way the world looks at us. The Japanese, who've used this more than anybody else, say Washington's unlawful ways of corrupting public practice are unrivaled, are like Indonesia. He said, then the British say, Washington's unlawful ways of correcting public practice are unrivaled in the world, and the Dutch say the problem is too many Americans are for sale, and our solution is to put a big sign up, not for sale at any price. This great country is not for sale. Can we agree for that? We should abolish the electoral vote for presidency. It's obsolete and has no purpose. We should vote on Saturdays and Sundays, not on Tuesdays, so working people can get to the polls. Nearly half our people don't even vote, and this makes it possible for them to come to the polls. Anytime we're going to have major changes on Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and all these programs that will have to be redesigned, re-engineered, and changed, They should be explained in detail to the people after they have been designed in detail, pallet tested, optimized, debugged, and you can actually go out and see that program in operation, explain it in detail to the American people, explain the benefits, explain the cost, and then have a national referendum so the people can say, that's what we want, as opposed to having the lobbyists, to quote the New York Times, write the bills. They had a story, said the lobbyists are no longer in the halls of Congress, they're at the table writing the bills. Do you want a Medicare program designed for the patient, or do you want one designed for the medical companies and the pharmaceutical companies? I think it's pretty obvious, since you're going to pay for it, you'd like for it to be designed for the patient, right? Only the referendum will cure that. We feel very strongly that future tax increases should be, I love this one, should be put on the federal ballot at a time when the House is running, a third of the Senate is running, and the President is running, and we, the people, since we have to pay for it, should have it fully explained why the tax increase is necessary and why we should make this sacrifice. And believe me, they're going to really put discipline on spending rather than confront you with endless tax increases if you have the last word, because they might not get reelected if they put one in that didn't make sense. That'll put discipline on spending. The two political parties won't make these changes. They're owned by the special interests who get huge benefits and paychecks as a result, and paybacks as a result of their contributions. We take nothing from the special interests. The legislative process, and I'm going to, as I button this up so we can go to the Q&A, the legislative process only considers one problem at a time, and every engineer here knows that when you start to create a new system, let's say a car, you wouldn't just think of the tires. You've got to think of the car first, break it into subcomponents, then carefully engineer and design the car, and then in great detail engineer, design, test, debug, and optimize the shock absorber, the cigarette lighter, the door lock, the engine, every little piece of that car. Then you put it together and it goes on the test track and it's a bad day, even though it was all designed to work. Then you test it, optimize it, debug it, get it working, and for the first time you know what the car will really do, what the car really costs, etc., etc., etc. Every social program we have was a noble concept passed into law. Be like an artist. If I came here today, I've got an artist sketch for a skyscraper in New York City, I want you to all invest in it. Your first question would be, Ross, have you gotten an architect to draw a detailed plan? No. It's a dream. Well, come back when you've got the plans. Come back when you know the facts. Did you have anybody test the soil to see if the rock underneath it will hold this building up? No, we'll get to that later, but I'd like to get your money today, right? That's not the way you make things work. That's the only point I'm trying to make. You have to go through all those steps to make things work. There's another thing here. You can't just consider one problem at a time. Let's assume you did Medicare right all by itself, forget everything else. Medicaid, okay, Social Security. All of these are like pieces of a complex puzzle. They have to fit together. And we have to be able to afford all of them. And then you say, okay, are we done now? We did it all right, we did it perfectly. No, we have to be able to pay for all of them. So underneath that, you've got to have the tax base that pays for all of this. Are we through now? No. We've got to have the job base that will create the tax base, right? Now are we finished? And now are we finished? No. We have to talk about the granite foundation on which our great country rests. And that is, who are we? Are we a warm, loving, caring people? Are we devoted to this country, devoted to freedom, devoted to one another? Or are we a mean-spirited, bitter people who are divided by race, religion, and every other possibility? Divided teams lose, united teams win. We have got to come together and be a warm, loving, caring people who are united to making this country and making the 21st century the greatest in its history. And we can do all of these things, but time is critical. This is like arterial bleeding. The longer you wait, the more difficult it is to accomplish these things. Let me give you an ancient quote. The budget must be balanced. The treasury must be refilled. The debt must be reduced. And the arrogance of public officials must be controlled. That pretty well summarizes everything I've said, right? These are not my words. Cicero spoke these words 2,000 years ago. I mention them to you today to remind you again as I close. History tends to repeat itself. This is our country. It is in your hands. We can make it anything you want it to be. But the thing you can't be is cynical, disillusioned, or turned off. You have to have that same spirit the pioneers had, and that the Pilgrims had, and that the Minutemen had. They were plowing 1 minute. You say, I'm going to Yale 1 minute, and I am in the next minute. You'd have been out there shooting and fighting to get this country's freedom, right? Yeah, that's what we need. And the most important thing you can do is study the issues, know the facts, not be manipulated by, I'm leaning the opposite. I'm going to give you free college tuition. God bless you all. Vote for me. Now, you know, if you buy that, excuse me. And that came up in the debates, you may remember that. If you buy that kind of stuff, I've got a lot of stuff in my attic that I haven't used for years that I'd love to talk to you about selling to you at a premium. Because you'll buy anything. Now, I'm going to stop talking and we'll have fun. We'll take your questions. Thank you very much. Privileged to be with you. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Perhaps make their seats for questions. To be fair to people in the balcony, I'll call on people from the audience as well as from the line. If you're near the mic, feel free to go up to the mic. Otherwise, you can just stay seated and we'll deal with questions from there. One more reminder, it is appropriate on the meeting floor to phrase questions in the third person. In this case, please refer to the guest, Mr. Perot, or the Reform Party candidate. At this time, then, are there questions for Mr. Perot?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. First, I'd like to encourage the guests to perhaps head on down to the green at about 4:30 and challenge the First Lady to some debate. Additionally, I was wondering if he could comment on how a party that accepts federal matching funds and has endorsed candidates that are Democratic or Republican in 430 in all the congressional districts can truly call themselves a reform party.
We have accepted federal funds. We did that because we had formed a party in all 50 states. The people had worked their hearts out to do it. It's supposed to take more than 2 years to form a party just in California. The people did it in 18 days. It was an incredible undertaking, and that people all across the country did the job. We were qualified to do that. And one of the reasons we took the money, see, we have a fraction of the money that the other two parties have. They have about $100 million that they spend. We have $29 billion. And the thing we wanted to do is show the American people that you can run a very successful campaign with a fraction of what they spend. And that it would be nice to have somebody in Washington who knew how to manage money. Then it got interesting. Part of our strategy was that we would be included in the debates because we met all the objective criteria. We did not meet the objective criteria in '92, but they included us. We won 2 out of the 3 debates, and even though now we meet all the criteria in '92, according to the polls, we won 2 out of 3. Then, in 1996, the two parties got together and said, we will exclude them. And we have no recourse because the Federal Election Commission does not have to hear a complaint for 120 days, and that's after November. So our other strategy was to buy 30 minutes of time, not 1 minute ads, so that we could explain the issues to the American people in detail. And suddenly the TV networks wouldn't sell us 30 minutes time like they did in 1992. Now we've gotten some time, but not nearly the time we needed. We asked for 30 minutes from each network each week. That would have been 4 30-minute shows a week to go through Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, all these different programs, what the problems are, how to make them work, and really try to have a tutorial or a teach-in on all of these issues. Well, that's the last thing the two parties want because they created all of these problems and they don't want to talk about them during a campaign. Then, in terms of endorsing the people, we can only do so much at once. Why would we endorse people who are not Reform Party members in the House and Senate races? We won't unless they're committed to the reforms, but the reason we will endorse them is that in 1994, we were the swing vote that made the difference. We can be the swing vote that makes the difference in the House and Senate in 1996, and then we will have a cohesive team in the White House, the House, and Senate committed to reforms. That's the logic behind it. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Are there further questions? Okay.
I'm wondering if you saw anything about the views of the current situation in Northern Ireland.
I couldn't get it.
The question is on Mr. Perot's views on the current situation in Northern Ireland.
My biggest concern with Ireland, which I've talked to a lot of people from Ireland, it's hard for me to understand why two religious groups can hate one another. The religions don't teach that. Religions don't teach you to hate one another. And yet that has gone on for many, many, many years. Ireland is a place with tremendous potential. And that division has really hurt that country. And the thing I would urge them to do is go back and study their religious doctrine and read those verses in their religious doctrine where they say, bless those who curse you and love your enemies and so on and so forth, and practice that and heal those old divisions and create a united Ireland. Now, it's easy to criticize Ireland. We've got some variations of that right here in the good old USA. And we need to read those same verses and practice those same teachings, because those are the teachings that made us a great country, those beliefs, and we need to keep that up. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Perot. It's nice to see another fellow Texan here in New Haven. My question involves the budget debt and the plan to balance the budget that both the Democrats and the Republicans have offered. They both offered plans to balance the budget in 7 years. I'm wondering how your plan, or the guest plan, would differ from that if you think 7 years is too long.
Excuse me. I hear, see, the Republicans, excuse me. Go
Just one final question about that. In 1992, you had a plan to raise taxes on the gasoline tax. Doubling gasoline prices. And I'm wondering if you still believe in that, and if you don't, what caused you to change your mind?
First thing, these people say they have a plan. If the Democrats have a plan, it's at best a very soft plan. The Republicans proposed a 7-year plan. Keep in mind, the president promised to balance the budget in 1992 when he was elected in 5 years. Never even brought it up, gave us a big tax increase, refused to come up with a plan to balance the budget at the time of the tax increase. Fact. Now then, if they've got something on paper, it at best is very soft. The Republican plan is all back-end loaded. In other words, it's like having a friend that says they're going to stop drinking, but only after 5 years. In the last 6th and 7th year, they'll quit. So that plan there is flawed too. And what we need to do is go through all these big programs in terms of where does the money go. It's Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. These programs are out of control. I've given you the numbers and the percentages people will have to pay. Social Security's got to be transitioned to a pension fund from pay-as-you-go. It used to work because we had 40 people at work for every person retired. We now only have 3.3 people at work for every person retired. We're headed for 2.2. So the solution on Social Security, you have to take these one at a time, is to redesign Social Security. The good news is it's all based on life expectancy. A good team of actuaries with a good computer and access to all the data can come up with really good options and alternatives and the cost, and you can predict those very accurately. Now, wouldn't it be nice if our country did that, right? They don't do that. That's what we want them to do. Then you'd have to move to Medicare. Fixing Medicare is more complex than putting a man on the moon. Reason. Putting a man on the moon followed the laws of physics. Medicare has millions of complex interrelated parts. You're going to have to go through you're going to have to get the best people in health care to be the architects of redesigning and re-engineering it. The Clinton Health Task Force excluded most of the leading authorities on health care. It'd be like getting a beekeeper to design my skyscraper. Now, you might not like architects, but if you're going to build a skyscraper, you better get one, right? Okay. Anyhow, you got to have a detailed plan for Medicare. Then you're going to have to go through the whole engineering series of steps, pilot test, optimize, and debug. And boy, are we going to get some exciting results from that, since we've never done it before. We're going to find out that the ideal healthcare system for New York City is very different from the ideal healthcare system for a remote area in Iowa. Just a fact. One shoe will not fit every foot. Maybe you should put a cobbler on every task force, but because they understand that. The government doesn't understand that. then, but redoing health care and making it cost effective will be, in other words, you've got to stop this massive hemorrhaging from these big programs in order to balance the budget and pay the debt. Within a year, you can go through this whole task force thing and get the facts as opposed to the dreams. Then you go on from there to a new tax system, because our current tax system is like an old inner tube. It's just covered with patches, and most of those patches are special interest advantages that have been placed on there for people who gave big campaign contributions, and create a new tax system. Again, this is logical, this is numbers. You can use the IRS database, you can use the computer, like you'd use a wind tunnel to create a new airplane. You can create all. We should not run around mindlessly screaming flat tax and things like that. We should look at all of them rationally. Flat tax, consumption tax, financial transaction tax, savings tax, all these different ideas that people have. Grind out the numbers, show the American people the facts, and in every case have a referendum. That means the voters are going to have to really get up the curve and understand them. But they have to do that, or otherwise the special interests that fund the elections will control the result. Go through that process, then you know what it's going to cost to run the government in the most cost-effective way we can come up with. That will determine the tax rate. So you have the new tax plan, the new tax rate, the cost to run the government. The programs have been pilot tested, optimized, debugged. You know they work. You implement them. You pay the bills. Then you've got to have a growing, expanding job base, which means you've got to clean up your stupid trade deals, otherwise you won't. There is no reason to create a job in the USA today if you can go to the cheapest labor in the world and ship it in duty-free. We have totally stacked the deck to drain jobs out of our country. We've got to clean that up. Can we clean it up? Yes. Why can we clean it up? Because we have an ace that we are busy giving away. Right now we have all 52 cards. We are 5% of the world's population, 25% of the world's market. We're the biggest buyer in the world. Why? The middle class. You want a strong, growing middle class to keep that buying power. The whole world wants to sell to you, and the whole world will agree to fair, free trade. And the first thing I would suggest we do in a very nice way is go to our trading partners and say, we'll take the same deal we gave you. Now, you can't get fairer than that in a trade, right? That's not the way it is now, believe me. What their freedom to sell to us dwarfs our freedom to sell to them. We've got to balance the trade, and just tell each of these big trading partners we got to balance the books every year. Otherwise, we're weakening our nation and we're weakening your customer base. Otherwise, we will be like they are. They have no middle class. A few people own the country, and the rest of them work for bread. These are the kinds of things that all have to be put together to put together the plan to have a country that can balance the budget, pay the debt. Can we agree that the world's greatest nation and the world's last superpower should be debt-free and have a cash reserved for contingencies, just like a person should in their life? Certainly. Excuse me, now, did I leave anything out?
Well, my question about the gasoline consumption, what caused you to change your mind?
No, the gasoline tax is certainly one I would consider, and the facts are our gasoline costs a fraction of what people pay for gasoline anywhere else in the world. And of course, nobody wants to raise the taxes, and I understand that, but we've got to either quit spending the money or raise the revenues. There is no free lunch. Yes.
Further questions?
Yes, but let's talk about technology first. Let's look at the real world. You need an environment that encourages inventors. Right now, we're privatizing the patent system, and you go to any great engineering school in this country, you go to all of the inventors in this country, and they are up in arms. We're going to give away all of our patents. We're giving downloaded discs to all of these countries now of all the pending patents. Whoops. There goes any incentive to be an inventor. We used to file 70% of the patents that were filed at the patent office. The last time I checked, we were down to 30%. Most of the patents filed with our patent office are coming from other nations. That means most of the ingenuity and creativity is overseas. Let's look back a few years at when we were the most creative group. What government program funded Thomas Edison? Nobody. Everybody thought he was dumb. What government program funded the Wright brothers? Imagine 2 bicycle repairmen. They didn't even sell new bicycles. Showing up in Washington say, we want to build the first airplane. Could we have a government grant? The government did have a program to create an airplane. A Dr. Langley had the funding, but 2 bicycle repairmen from Dayton, Ohio beat him because they were driven to fly. And they were so talented and so bright, they didn't get the education, they didn't get the breaks, but they had the brains, and they taught the world to fly. And I could tell you these stories by the hour. Having Uncle Sam just mindlessly fund stuff as political pork is no substitute for creating an environment where people can be urged to be creative and be rewarded by having patents and that sort of thing. Now let's go to college loans. The biggest problem we have with college loans, there's just one. The students don't pay them back. Now then, let's talk about what's fair. We've talked about how lucky you are. I can introduce you to people who are as bright as you are who never got the breaks you got. I'll tell you about one. Don Eflin, young man, came back from the war in World War II and was so bright they accepted him at MIT. Couldn't afford to go. So bright, accepted him at West Point. Couldn't afford to go. Excuse me, failed the eye exam at West Point. Failed the eye exam. Spent his life on the factory floor at General Motors as a union worker. Isn't that interesting? Now, he's retired, and guess what? The last time I heard from him, he lectures at the school he couldn't afford to attend, MIT. Now, is it right to ask the Don Eflins of the world, when a college student that got the tuition loan and didn't pay it back, to have to cough it up in taxes? I don't think that's right, do you? Take all of the electricians, the plumbers, the people that make the world go around, the people working third shift. Should they have to pay for your college education because you didn't keep your written commitment to pay your loan? That's the problem with student loans. Cure that and the problem goes away. Every student should consider it a sacred obligation to repay those loans. Then the banks would be happy to loan you money. The government subsidy wouldn't be chewed up to pieces because you don't repay it. Right now, if you don't repay it, they just turn to Uncle Sam, he has to pay it. Yes, sir. Excuse me, I keep getting done.
Madam Moderator, future President of the United States, Mr. Perot, I thank you for listening to you, the purity and the goodwill for the United States and the future for the America, for the all people who they live here. I would say to the public one thing. If you want to live like to live Russia people, vote for Dole and Clinton. If you want to preserve America, American ideal, and American purity, vote for Mr. Perot. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for coming.
Please keep it quiet. This is question and answer. Thank you very much. Mr. Carter.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank Mr. Perot for taking up the cause of the third-party movement in the United States. However, I'd like to ask him that, based on the fact that the two major parties are captured by their own internal interests and really don't reflect the will of the people, how the Reform Party has avoided doing this if the Reform Party has basically shut out opposing voices from its own candidate and has certainly not had a crystal clear nomination process for its presidential candidate.
Well, we did not shut out opposing voices. We did everything we could to bring people in to the race. For example, in the case of Governor Lamb, I paid for all the literature that was mailed out to everybody who signed a petition that included his positions, his platforms, and what have you. On one occasion, we had to fly from one speaking engagement to another, and he couldn't make it unless he flew with me, and I invited him to fly with me so he could be there. And again and again and again and again. Any problem he ever brought up, we tried to respond to immediately and make sure that every possible consideration was given to him as a candidate. We did all of the work and paid all of the expenses to set up the conventions and the places that he spoke. He had full, free access to time. He was very sensitive about when he would speak, and I told him he could speak whenever he wanted to. He said he wanted to speak in front of me. I said, that's fine. Then he said, I have several other people I would like to have speak too. And I said, that's fine. Do whatever you want to do. I don't see the Democrats and the Republicans keeping it that open. We had it wide open, and this is all part of creating the new party and the new process, and we have done the very best job we could to keep it very fair and very highly principled. The question on the Family Medical Leave Act. Okay, fine. I'm sorry we're having trouble hearing you. We feel, and certainly I feel, that, you know, when a family has a crisis and needs to have some time, that the company should make it available. Now, in all of my companies, that just happens. It didn't take a federal law to do it, and maybe in some companies it does. But anytime there's a crisis, not only do we try to support the family, we try to make sure they get the best medical attention. As a matter of policy, I am called 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, anytime there is a crisis of this type, to make sure that they get the same treatment that my children would get or that my family would get. And in any well-run company, that should be done, because that builds a great team spirit, and it's the right thing to do. Now, there may be companies where you need to tap them on the shoulder and get them to do that by law. And if we have to do that, maybe that'll help them learn by law. It'd be a lot better if they did it because they knew it was good business to do it and the right thing to do it. The interesting phenomena we're caught in a trap with now, though, and as you think all this through, and you think of any new law, you have to think of the unanticipated adverse side effects. We've signed all these one-sided trade deals, and what you're doing with a lot of corporations, anytime you impose any new benefits for workers, is you're giving the owner of the company who didn't do those things they should have already been doing another incentive to go overseas where nobody ever brings it up, nobody talks about it, and you can hire kids for nothing and they lock them in the factory and create designer clothes, believe it or not, that you and I pay a premium for back here. Now, it's fascinating that none of us think about who made this. And I think if we thought about, this is a company that uses children and locks the factory, and I've seen those malnourished children on television. Anytime we do anything now to benefit the American worker, they tend to move the factories overseas. So we've got to walk a fine line here, but let's go back to the principle. Every company should do that. Every company should feel a sense of shame that does not do that. And we used to have a country that was driven by a sense of shame. There is very little shame anymore, and it would be nice if we had it, because that solves a lot of problems.
Maybe perhaps 2 or 3 more questions. The gentleman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just had a question, Mr. Perot. What would you do what have you done in the past, or what will you do in the future to ease the tension, the racial tension that is destroying our country?
Well, what I have done in all my life, because I was taught this as a child by my parents, is that we are all the same. And that in my parents' term, we're all God's children. And in the 1930s, when things were very different, I will never forget the fact that my father, who was a man who never got to finish high school, he was smart enough to go to Yale, but his dad died, and he had to drop out of school to take care of his mother. The black people, and he typically would have 1 or 2 working for him in his little cotton business. When they got too old to work, he would keep paying them with money he didn't have. And I remember as a little boy saying, Dad, why do you do that? He says, because they're good people, they're my friends, and they have to keep on living. There was no Social Security, no government program for them at that time. And more importantly, every Sunday after church, he would go out to their homes, go into their homes, and visit with them because he loved them. And he would take me to the black churches because he loved the churches and he loved the music. And I had all of those and we would go to the baptisms. And then I would see my mother feeding what we called hobos. We would now call them street people, as they would leave the railroad tracks, come by our house during the Depression with food she didn't have. And I was taught that from childhood. And I think if you glance at my life, I learned a lesson that will stay with me forever. I threw a paper out in the black community when I was a little boy. There were sand streets, not even gravel roads. And I had to ride a horse because you couldn't ride a bicycle with a load of papers. And in the middle, and I was absolutely safe at 4 o'clock in the morning. Think about that. These were the poorest people in my town. With luck, they made $9 a week. I was absolutely safe. If I had had a problem, they would all come out and try to help me. Times have changed. But my dad got very sick, had to have a kidney operation, had to go to another city to have it. Nobody would throw the route, and I had to go to the customers and explain to them I would be gone several days with my dad. And they, to a person, said, "Save the old papers and bring them to us when you come back." And I said, "You don't want old papers." And they said, "But if your dad's sick, son, you need the money." Now, can you imagine people with $9 a week wanting to help a boy by taking the papers when they were old papers because they cared about other people? And I will never forget that. And the first time I had more money than I needed to pay my bills was right after my company went public. And within 90 days, I'd given away half of it for a school for disadvantaged minority children to see that we tapped their full potential. And I would like for you all to see and study, and those of you who are studying education, please come down and see the East Dallas Community School, where we take these terribly disadvantaged children at birth. They get breakfast, lunch, and dinner. They get loved and hugged and all the things little children need that some children don't get. We keep them through the 3rd grade, and those children do beautifully academically when they go into the public schools in the 4th grade. And you can see how to change America in one generation. And that's the kind of thinking I would like to bring to our government. We now know how the baby's brain is wired. We now know that a baby thinks well or poorly of himself by the time he's 18 months old. And if he has a negative self-image, that is hard to change. We know that a baby learns how to learn by the time he's 3. Now talk to the neurologists, they'll confirm all of this. And we understand that we can change America, and particularly the disadvantaged children, in one generation. And it cost a fraction to have this little school compared to the cost to keep those same people in prison as adults. And this is a very cost-effective way. Now, this is all done with private funds. And I think if you go back and look at the record all through my life, you will see that I have, the first man that joined me when I started my company was Hispanic. I didn't pick him to make a statement. I picked him because he was bright and talented and had what it took. One of the founders of my new company, DeSoto Jordan, happened to be black. I didn't pick him because of that. I picked him because he was so talented and so capable and does a brilliant job. We had one of the first women on our board of directors when we were a tiny little nothing company, and it was such an odd thing, they wrote a story about it in Forbes magazine. I said, "What in the world is this?" We put Diane Folsom-Logan on the board because she earned it. And our policies in all of my companies are, it doesn't matter what color you are, where you went to school. It doesn't matter what your sex is. It doesn't matter all of these things that people put up as barriers. We're interested in what you can do and what you've done lately. And we want honest, tough, smart, self-reliant people who will go out and do a great job. And we are absolutely blind to race, religion, and all this stuff that separates our country. And that's one of the reasons the companies have been so successful. It works. It's the right thing to do, and it works.
Second and final question.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Earlier in his speech, Mr. Perot talked about the danger of having the voters have control over their own government benefits, and that would be very harmful to the principle of fiscal discipline. Yet later on in his speech, Mr. Perot talked about the idea of having a referendum
where major changes in Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid would be voted on by the populace. I was wondering whether Mr. Perot thinks that that idea would possibly be difficult to reconcile with ideas of fiscal discipline, and secondly, whether, since voter turnout in elections for President and Senate and House are so low, how are we going to get large voter turnout for a policy referendum?
Well, first, I disagree with you. I didn't say earlier that the people couldn't do this. I feel very strongly they could do it, so there's a little gap there. What was I saying that caused you to feel that? I was saying that the voters couldn't respond to these questions if given the opportunity.
Oh, I thought, Madam Speaker? Yes, for clarification, I thought, did Mr. Perot earlier in his speech mention that part of the problem why the budget was growing at such a fast rate was that politicians were promising more and more government benefits to people, and people would vote for those politicians on the premise of wanting more benefits for themselves?
Well, the way it's handled now, but if you give them all the facts at once, say, here is this great new program. Here is a Rolls Royce for everybody, and a yacht in Palm Beach, and a castle on the hill. And here's what it's going to cost you, and here's what you're going to have to pay in taxes. Now, do you want it or not? Then you're looking at all the facts, but if you just kind of promise it to me like it won't cost me anything, and that you're going to pay for all of it, see, we all love something that everybody else will pay for that won't cost us anything. But when you get down to the referendum and you put all the cards on the table and you give the people the facts, I think you're going to see the American people really energized. I don't think there's any question that everybody's going to show up to vote on that referendum on Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, and the tax system. Do you? I mean, this is like saying, would you show up for oxygen if there wasn't any around? I think so. No, you'll have a very healthy revitalization of grassroots democracy. Well, great question, because I hope you'll ask President Clinton that when he shows up here. Because, as you know, all of the money pouring into his campaign is coming from Indonesia, and that's the country that violated those human rights. Now, Kim, if you're going to talk the talk, walk the walk, okay? You remember when the President of the United States said he would not give China most favored nation status until they stopped the human rights violations in 1992? We all voted for that, right? Then when the Riyadis in Indonesia put pressure on him to do it because they had given him so much money for his campaigns, he gave China most favored nation status, and the Riyadis got the right to build $1 billion electrical generation plant in China. A nice payoff for the Riyadis, right? Then later on, when Webster Hubbell was going to jail, the Riyadis took care of him by giving him big money and retainer fees, and nobody's quite clear on what he did for them as he was on his way to jail. But this is politics the way it is today, and we have to clean it up. Certainly, we need to have, now back to your question. So I just had to put a preface on my answer, because in the situation we're in now, if people kept their promises, you wouldn't have to ask the question, right? If they had lived up to what they said they would do in '92 about human rights, absolutely, we need to make it very clear. Now, the leverage we have tremendous leverage. Do we have to tolerate Mexico shipping $120 billion a year in drugs across our border? No. Do you realize what the inside word on that is in Washington? We have to let it go on for a while to help stabilize the peso. And we are wrecking our inner cities. We are wrecking our young people who use those drugs. And back to at East Timor, certainly we need to be consistent in our policy, and whenever human rights are being violated, we should take the necessary steps, and we have tremendous leverage. We can use Teddy Roosevelt's words. Speak softly, but carry the big stick. Fortunately, we have the big stick because of the middle class who buys all these goods, and as long as we have that, the world is not going to want to get crossways with us, and if they think they can't ship goods in and have all of this child labor flooding us with goods from Indonesia, which is what we have now, right? They're going to shape up. They'll shape up, and we can clean this up. and we should. I'm not one to lunge at what steps we would do. I would take whatever the proper and necessary steps are, and I would not make that decision till I looked at all my options. And those are excellent options. But I'm not one to bungee jump at night without a cord, or dive into a swimming pool before I check to see if the water's there. I want to measure twice and cut once, to use the old carpenter saying. Now we're taking one more. What's the plan? Listen, we're at the end of the program. It's a privilege to be with you. I want all of you to understand that mine, particularly the young people here, the only reason I've given 5 years of my life to this is because of you. I have no personal goals except to pass on a better, stronger country to our children and grandchildren. And I can tell you a very brief story that says it all. When we were rescuing our people from Tehran, I called on a retired Army colonel, legendary colonel, special forces guy, Bull Simons, to lead the rescue, and he said over the phone, "Yeah, I'll do it." I haven't talked to him for 5 years. Then I offered to pay him, and in words I won't repeat, he told me he wouldn't take money for rescuing Americans. Then he did it, and he brought them out 540 miles overland. He did the largest prison break in history, and on and on and on, no casualties, done perfectly. When we were back in Dallas and he saw these two men hugging their wives and children, he punched me with his elbow, and I looked at him and he said, "I just got paid for the trip." Now, when we have solved these problems, and when we have put our financial house back in order, and when we are leaving our children a better, stronger country, I'll look you squarely in the eye and say, "I just got paid for the trip," because that is the only reason I'm doing it. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
At this time, is there an appropriate motion?
Motion.
The President, Ms. Tusi.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I move that the Yale Political Union thank Mr. Perot for his fine maiden speech on the floor of this body.
Second.
Without objection, so ordered. Is there perhaps another appropriate motion? Mr. Fishkin.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move that we adjourn.
Second.
Without objection, so ordered, and we are adjourned.
Brian, thank you. Yes, sir. Thank you.
Earlier in the week, Mr. Perot was at Purdue University.
You got to be second.
On Monday, he campaigns in Chicago, including a stop at Northwestern.